Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all doing very well today. In this video, we've got Gibson versus PRS. Should be a good one. Let's get going. Yes, PRS versus Gibson, always a fun comparison, and it's interesting to see what models each company is bringing out to try to, attract consumers to their brand. So we're going to look at two of them today. Let's meet the guitars. Now in the past, I've compared a PRS core model versus a Gibson Les Paul standard, both very high-end, very expensive guitars. If you want to see how that played out, I will link to it above. Today we're going to be focusing on a little bit more affordable guitars in that upper mid-range tier. Right, so guitar number one is the Gibson Les Paul Tribute. I really like this guitar. It's Gibson's most affordable Les Paul. It's a workhorse, it's bare bones, but the pickups sound great. I think it sounds just as good as some really expensive Gibson guitars. It's got a maple neck like the old 70s Les Pauls, so it's a little bit stronger, very durable, great sounding pickups, as I mentioned. It forgoes things such as a fancy flame top. You get just a plain top on this one, some binding and that kind of stuff, mostly ornamentation stuff, but it plays great, it sounds great. So this is our entry from Gibson. Now guitar number two is from PRS SE, and this is the most Gibson of the PRS guitars. And of course, PRS does their own thing, but it's got a lot of nods. This is one of the only models with a stop tailpiece and a two-pneumatic bridge, mahogany body, mahogany neck, rosewood fingerboard. So this is the PRS SE Starla. It comes in at about close to half the price of the cheapest Gibson. So is this a good budget Les Paul replacement? Well, let's do an A/B test and find out. So these are the guitars. Can the PRS out Gibson the Gibson? Well, today we're going to find out. Now, of course, there are some differences between these instruments. Most notably, on the Les Paul, it's a mahogany body with a maple top. On the PRS, just straight mahogany. The neck, as I mentioned, maple neck on the Gibson, mahogany neck on the PRS. Both have rosewood fingerboards, and of course, slight differences in the scale length. 24 3/4 on the Gibson, 25 on the PRS. So those are the most notable differences. We'll talk about playability on the end, but let's plug these in. I want to hear how it sounds, Les Paul versus PRS. So after listening to those clips played back to back, let me know which guitar you thought sounded the best. Now, either guitar could definitely play clean, overdrive, high gain, no problem. They both sounded really good. But to my ear, listening back to back, the PRS SE definitely had more cut, more treble. So if you want to play like heavy rhythmic tracks, you're playing styles like metal or just chugging, I think the PRS SE is the better choice. The Les Paul, a little bit more of an all-rounder. It does all things really good, but I think if, you're playing just like blues, rock, clean, maybe go with the Les Paul. If you're playing some of those styles plus metal, go with the PRS SE. That would be my recommendation. I just thought that the pickups in the Starla are a little bit different than some of the other PRS pickups. So bear that in mind. The Starla does have a special set of pickups, as you could tell from looking at them, and they are just as high output as the Les Paul. So in terms of like the overall levels, very, very similar. But in terms of the EQ profile, that PRS SE a little bit more treble. And the Les Paul, of course, a little bit more rounder and warmer. So it just depends what tones you like, but let me know. I'd love to hear. All right, now that we've heard a few tones, let's talk about playability. This is something you simply cannot ignore when choosing a guitar. So let's start off with the weight. Now, on the Tribute, this was 8.3 pounds. Really reasonable for a guitar of this build. Les Pauls can be very heavy, anywhere between 8 and 8.5 pounds, and you're doing excellent on a Les Paul. Now on the PRS SE Starla, it's 7.5 pounds, much lighter and, can easily be felt in the hand. And mostly that comes down to, of course, the thickness of the body. Les Pauls, they're just chunky guitars for sure. Much thinner body on the Starla. And I think that's what accounts for most of the weight difference. Now, as for the neck profiles, I've got to say, shockingly similar between these two guitars. I had zero problems jumping back and forth between these two instruments. There are some slight differences in carve, but in terms of the overall thickness, I would say the Les Paul maybe has a little bit thicker shoulders and a little bit, maybe thinner or just a different carve on the PRS SE, but in terms of the overall thickness and how they felt to play, like I said, very, very similar. Now, in terms of like fret ends and stuff like that, excellent on both guitars. I would say the Gibson just has a different profile of fret, so it's a little bit thicker on the ends and a little bit more svelte on the PRS SE. They're just carved a little bit, with a steeper angle. But otherwise, fretwork is excellent on both guitars. And finally is body ergonomics. Well, we can just set the Les Paul aside now. Like a Telecaster, it's got none. Now on the PRS, there are a few carves, most notably, of course, the PRS scoop right there. Makes it very comfortable for getting your hand up. It's got a bevel that goes along the front, so when you're strumming with your arm, nice little bevel there so it doesn't cut in. And of course, there it is, the belly scoop. So lots of contours on the Starla. On the Les Paul, of course, it's a slab of wood. Now in terms of things like hardware, pickups, fretwork, tuning machines, I really felt like these guitars were pretty equal across the board. When I picked one up, I never felt like it was way better than the other one or way worse than the other. So I think it's pretty comparable in terms of things like, the stop tailpiece, the tune-o-matic bridge, that kind of stuff. That hardware felt very good on both guitars. Now, in terms of, how they feel, well, very different. And it really depends on what you value from a guitar. If you want that more classic look of a Les Paul body with the weight penalty, go for it. It's a great guitar. If you want a slightly more modern experience in terms of, the playability, the ergonomics, the body cuts, that kind of stuff, the PRS Starla, much more modern playing from that standpoint, but it still does have a little bit of that vintage flair. So I think both of these guitars are really cool. It just comes down to number one, price, because even though it's the cheapest Gibson, it's still a pretty expensive guitar, so bear that in mind. The Starla SE is a much better deal at close to half the price, so bear that in mind as well. But if you want more of the classic Les Paul, go with the Gibson. If you want something that sounds very close, but with a different aesthetic and a little bit more modern playing experience, go with the PRS. Thanks so much for watching, you guys. I hope you enjoyed the comparison. Let me know in the comment section below which guitar you thought sounded the best. Other than that, if you haven't subscribed yet, consider doing so. You can hit the bell and you'll know when new videos go up. Other than that, have yourself a great day. Take care.